first mentioned the Parliamentarian's Guide yesterday and the fact that we are taking this global with the support of the Interparliamentary Union and the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. I wanted to invite Jade just to say a couple of words about the process that she's been leading in putting together the Youth Forward, and particularly excited because Jade is the youngest person ever to go to the North Pole, the South Pole, and Greenland. Did I get the trifecta? So Jade, thank you so much for being with us. We'd love to hear from you briefly about what you've been doing.
Thanks, Amanda. And just a short note from me, but really it's a message of gratitude for the University of Exeter for having us here this week to be working on the Youth Forward for the Parliamentarian's Guide for Climate Change and Climate Solutions. I've been working alongside Rebecca Warren, former UWC head and senior manager at Tilting Futures, along with two ASU students and two ASU students and one from the University of Exeter. Yesterday we spent basically the whole day locked in on coming up with a first draft for this Youth Forward. And as Amanda mentioned, my kind of personal interest in this topic came from some time, actually a lot of time that I spent in the Earth's polar regions, which really instilled in me a love for the Earth's environment and a strong sense of responsibility to play my part in protecting these places for future generations. So I'm really excited to be involved in this process and to be working alongside other young people and to ensure that youth have a voice in such an important process and have their voice heard in change making for generations to come. So really grateful for the opportunity and looking forward to sharing with you all the draft once it has been through a few more rounds. So thank you.
Well, morning everybody. Hope you had a nice evening yesterday. Got early nights, I trust. There's a few people missing, so maybe there's a bit of late night going on. Thank you, Jade, as well for those comments. I know she has to spin off right now. But she's absolutely right to focus attention on the polar regions, which are in peril, there's no doubt. With temperatures now, depending on where you want to think about it, around about 1.5 above pre-industrial levels, we can take a look in the past. The last interglacial in the Eemian 120,000 years ago, which is an unusual interglacial, but temperatures then were a bit warmer than they are now, maybe somewhere around 3 degrees warmer than pre-industrial. And that was a disaster for the cryosphere because likely sea levels were about 6 meters higher then than they are today, which means pretty much half of the Greenland ice sheet and probably the West Antarctic ice sheet would have disappeared. So as an analogue for our future, that's quite a stark one to remind ourselves that seems to be where we're headed with remarkable and irreversible changes to our coastlines, our cities at the coast, structures, infrastructure, all those things are in danger. The question is, how long will it take? Will it be hundreds of years? Will it be thousands of years? And that's a critical issue for us in glaciology to try to resolve. But I just feel that there is an inevitability being built in as a consequence of what our society is doing, which is a tragedy, of course, which is why we're here, to talk about how to mitigate some of those things and, of course, to slow down as far as possible some of those issues that are already locked in and unavoidable, and that's what we're here to discuss. So it's great that we're doing that. I'm going to hand back to Amanda, and she's going to take us through the first panel. We've got a whole series of panels today. She's going to do the first one, and then we've got a few other people coming in later. But we're going to have a fun day today, I'm sure, but lots of interesting conversations to have. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you so much, Martin. So our panel this morning has a policy focus, and we're very lucky to have an ex-minister and two parliamentarians who are part of our network. So we are working with the Interparliamentary Union on something called Parliaments for the Planet, which if you Google, you will see has a lot of interviews, and we're very, very pleased to have an active network who are commenting on all sorts of things, and will be commenting on this work before it is finalised as well. So just checking in, Krista, do we have everybody online? Okay, perfect. And this is from Panama? So very pleased to be introducing the former Minister of Tourism from Panama, Ivan Eskildsen, and he will first show us a video and then tell us about the regenerative travel experiences that he has been working on in Panama to ensure that Indigenous voices are included and that we have a bioeconomy approach, as Nigel Topping calls it. So thank you.
Good morning. It's a pleasure joining today in the New Carbon Economy Consortium's annual meeting. I'm saying hello from Panama in Central America. My name is Ivan Eskildsen, founder and CEO of Ogaya Travel. And today I have a pleasure and honor of joining you in the policy panel. So I'll go ahead and share my slides to present my topic for today. And the topic I will share with you today is that of regenerative travel in Panama as a powerful tool in a carbon negative country. So first of all, to get us situated, Panama, of course, is known across the world mainly because of the Panama Canal. Maybe you're not, many of you are not aware that travel is growing in Panama. So we are basically a crossroads of the world. That's the reason why the Panama Canal was built in our country, but I'll share more of what makes us special. So the reason the Panama Canal was built here is actually because at approximately 3 million years ago, the area of land that now is called Panama was emerged from the ocean, connecting North America to South America. This allowed for what scientists call the Great American Biotic Interchange. And now this has allowed this crossing of species, or ever since back then, and it makes Panama this special crossroads not only for commerce but also for biodiversity and in general people throughout the ages. So now, because we have this very special crossroads, also biodiversity and people, Panama is actually still been preserved. And this is the reason why we are one of the world's 3 carbon negative countries. So to give you some data, Panama holds more species of birds and amphibians and animals than the US and Canada combined. So this very tiny country, it gives you an idea of the degree and the amount of biodiversity that we have. And one of the main reasons for this is that the indigenous peoples of Panama still manage around 24% of the country's territory. So, as many of you might be aware, around the world, only 5%, there's only 5% of the world's population that is indigenous, but they, however, protect around 80% of the Earth's remaining biodiversity. So there's obviously a correlation there that's very interesting. And nowadays, where we need to continue preserving the world's biodiversity, gives us a clue of where maybe we should be heading or looking to look for answers and for solutions for the future. So this is why when I held the role as Minister of Tourism, we definitely looked at tourism as a tool to preserve Panama's natural and cultural treasures. And back then, 2019, when I assumed the role, we started planning and considered we needed a sustainable tourism master plan. And for the first time in their country's history, the Cabinet Council approved the Sustainable Tourism Master Plan in 2021, effectively making it a state policy. And we launched a vision for the country where we wanted to be recognized as a world-class sustainable tourism destination, thanks to the extraordinary wealth and diversity of our natural and cultural heritage, as well as the quality of our services. So I won't get into the details of everything we implemented in the Tourism Master Plan because there's not enough time, unfortunately. However, today, what I will get into is fast forward 2023. I finished my role in the government and I decided to launch this travel company, which I mentioned earlier. We're called Ogaya Travel. So basically, continuing the work I did from the public policy side in the government, now we're going ahead and implementing what I believe was a great commercial opportunity, but also an opportunity to create impact in the world as a regenerative travel company. So first, to define briefly what we understand as a regenerative travel company, we have to maybe define first what that the traditional enterprises that are working, especially in travel, mainly following the model of extractive business, where the winner takes all. It it follows a viewpoint of separateness in the world, as opposed to that, then regenerative enterprises, and in travel specifically, um, make a bet towards the restoration of the ecosystems, following a model where we look for the well-being of all involved, and also where we try to look at the interconnectedness of everything. So this all sounds very familiar. We believe this is, even though it's a new model, a new way of doing business nowadays, that we believe should be more and more implemented around the world, as it really, really represents great solutions for many of the world's challenges and issues, as far as um, climate change and issues in the world that we face. But it's really actually a very old way of thinking, and this is why we point again to the indigenous peoples around the world. And as far as our company is concerned, actually the name comes from an indigenous word which means detach and open your eyes. So embedded in our business model is the concept that we want to take people to look for new perspectives, look for new ways of looking at things. And to give you a brief example of one of the experiences that we operate itineraries around all of Panama, but here I'll mention an example of a collaboration with some of the indigenous communities that we've worked with. So we're working this itinerary, which is called Sailing in the Caribbean Islands of Cunayala, an indigenous territory, San Blas, also known as San Blas. Here is an area that's been threatened by mass travel, mainly because people just want to go to the beautiful beach. However, the elders are worried about youth losing connection with their culture. In this case, what we've worked with them is a high added value of indigenous immersions as a possible solution, so people can not only go and learn from this beautiful heritage, but also help extend people's stay and have a greater financial return for the local population. So we actually partnered with the elders of the indigenous territory of Cunayala, and we agreed that not only will we help sort of elevate, in collaboration with them, their beautiful heritage, but from every visitor, their percentage of the proceeds goes to support a sacred natural medicine learning center. This learning center is a project that they wanted to develop, and we've seen it grow. Now they're actually building it, and we were very, very happy and proud to be a positive part of this. So, summarizing, we're talking about the preservation and revival of their biocultural heritage. So, in general, this direct relation of why in the world there are, the biodiversity is being preserved where the indigenous territories are, gives us a clue of that maybe we should work together on how can we help preserve this way of looking at the world. Of course, in the West, we won't necessarily adopt literally this way of living, but there's so many things that we can definitely learn from this. And through travel, we can find a way definitely to develop a bridge into helping finding means to connect with this way of looking at the world. And also very relevant to the topic of climate is the fact that in the Paris Agreement, there's an article talks about non-carbon benefits. So whenever there's an opportunity through a nature-based economy to create a sustainable management of forests, and in this case, create sustainable income through travel, then this is something positive that can help preserve these forests. So in this case, tourism can support the empowerment of communities, allowing them to sustain also their way of life. So this is something that I believe is embedded in the solution, and that's very, very valuable for the world. And I think not many people have maybe seen this element of the Paris Agreement. So to finalize, this today we've basically shared our regenerative travel model and how we are striving really to change the way people travel, not only through a more intentional approach through this focus of transformational travel, inwards facing to the traveler, but also connecting with a model of travel that connects directly with philanthropy. So impact to the communities that are visited. Below I mentioned just a few of the impact projects that every itinerary of our company has an opportunity to support. So to end, I would just want to thank you all. I wish I would have been able to join in person, but I really, really wish that we have a great result from this annual meeting and that we are all able to support in finding the solutions that our world needs. So thank you. On behalf of Ogaya Travel, don't hesitate to reach out if we can support in any way all of this topic and this conversation on climate. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I just realized it was 3 a.m. in Panama, so we didn't do a great job on there. No wonder he sent a video. But fascinating, Panama is one of 3 carbon negative countries, along with Bhutan. Some of you met Tinley Choden, who runs sustainability for the Kingdom of Bhutan last year, and Suriname. And it is a really important point, the fact that 5% of the world's population are stewarding 80% of the remaining biodiversity. And I love the fact that there's a master plan for sustainable tourism, which is preserving forests. And they are actually looking into carbon credits as well. That was one of the conversations we had, and they were trying to figure out how they could get those carbon credits certified. But of course, there's the ongoing debate with the Paris Agreement about additionality, which unfortunately is a little aside, in New Zealand, we were so driven to try to get the carbon credits, given the number of cows we have and the methane greenhouse gases, that we cut down a lot of indigenous forests and planted pine. And now they're on their 3rd planting, the hillsides are washing away, and indigenous peoples are finding that they no longer have access to their shellfish. So there's a lot of unintended consequences if we don't think these things through properly. So it's great to see that there's a master plan in place in Panama, and that they are actually thinking about engagement with the indigenous communities, and again, what Nigel Topping calls the bioeconomy. We will have our live and in-person global expert, Stephanie Arcusa, who is an assistant professor at Arizona State University Global Futures Lab, and has been doing a lot of work with Klaus Lochner in the policy dimension of carbon.
All right, good morning everybody. So I'm Stephanie Arcusa. I'm an assistant professor at Global Futures Lab. And what I would like to discuss with you today is a policy option that has become a point of discussion when it comes to creating a demand for carbon removal. This policy option is called a carbon storage obligation. And what it essentially does is internalize the cost of cleaning up fossil fuels. The essence of this policy is that for every ton of fossil carbon extracted, there is a ton of carbon sequestered. By fossil carbon, I'm talking about natural gas, coal, gasoline, limestone that's used for cement. The requirement is put at the point of extraction, and it corresponds to an equivalent amount of sequestration. So let me walk you through this policy idea. We've heard a few times now that carbon removal is a form of waste management. We've been putting emissions into the global commons, and these emissions need to be removed and taken care of. The problem is, what we don't often talk about, and yet is present in every subtext of our conversations about carbon removal, is that waste management demands a customer. Waste has no natural buyer. And yet, somebody has to pay for cleanup. Waste management is never voluntary. Maybe on the margins, people pick up rubbish on the beach, right? Maybe we recycle a little bit, but this is not a voluntary task if it is to be done at scale. Waste management is also never free. There is always somebody paying for waste management. Well, here we are in a similar situation. We have waste in our global commons, and we need somebody to pay for it. And it cannot be based on volunteers. It cannot be based on charity. It has to be mandated. There needs to be a mandated customer. You may think that we already have policy options to deal with this, and in some ways we do. We have efforts at government procurement. In the US, they tried this. However, when you actually crunch the numbers, if you only base waste management of emissions on government spending, we're talking about spending a third of government expenditures to do waste management on emissions. Now the question is that going to be acceptable for governments when there's many other services that governments must perform? You may think about tax credits, something that the US is very good at. Well, here again, we have an issue that tax credits are not reliable. They change with political interest. The value assigned to a tax credit also changes, as we see in Europe. And so in the end, you're left with a very volatile instrument that a carbon management industry cannot rely on. It might be good in the beginning to get you started, but if you want to sustain that industry, this type of instrument is just too volatile. Then we have the voluntary markets, and that's a great way to get started. We have been doing voluntary markets for 30 years. It seems to me that it might be time to move on from voluntary markets. And the last one I have here is that we also have compliance markets. But the issue that we are facing with those at the moment is that they're based on the most cost-effective solution. So instead of providing a reliable source of income for a waste management industry, it actually picks solutions by cost. And so by the time it gets to a price point that can be used to maintain a carbon management industry, it's further in time, and therefore all the investment has not been made to actually deploy capital-intensive technologies. So this is kind of the picture that we have today. It's a bunch of policy options that are not quite right to have a sustainable carbon management industry. It's very good to get it started, it's just not so good to keep it going. So to go back to that policy idea of a carbon storage obligation, it has different names around the world. Here in the UK, where it has really been socialized, it's actually called the carbon take-back obligation. Oxford University is really working on this, Miles Allen and his team. It has also been called mandatory sequestration, because that's what it is. It's demanding that we make a buyer buy carbon management. In the US, it has been called an extended producer responsibility, which is EPR. This is a type of policy that is often used to deal with waste. So, for example, in Arizona, we go to a car dealership and we want to replace the battery of our car, well, on the price of a battery is a fee, and that fee is actually paying for the recycling of the battery. This is an APR. In other countries, you might have a can recycling program where you pay a little fee so that you're going to be returning your can, and that those fees are paying for the recycling system. So this is kind of similar. It's the idea that the producer of the product is also having a responsibility in the management of the waste of the product that they're producing. And in the case of fossil fuel producers, their waste is the emissions that we are all producing when we use their products. So it is linking their products to the responsibility of cleaning up. So what it ends up doing, if we implement a policy like this one, is that it incorporates the cost of cleaning up into the price of fossil fuels. So it extends that responsibility not only on the producers, but also on all of us who are using those products. Because now, our products that we're using, the fossil fuels, are more expensive because they include the cleaning up. Now, an additional, let's say, consequence of having a policy like this one implemented is that it actually simplifies a lot of the carbon accounting that we've been hearing about and all the challenges. Because if you match the extraction of fossil fuels at the source with an equivalent amount of sequestration, you make the fossil fuel products carbon neutral. And anybody who is using those fossil products is now carbon neutral. Now, in a carbon accounting system, that basically eliminates the need to track the carbon throughout the entirety of the supply chains. The carbon neutrality is passed on to everybody as a price signal. There is almost no hope that the fossil fuel industry will absorb that cost, right? They will pass on the cost, but that's part of the responsibility too, because we're using those products. So the accounting system becomes simplified. What it also does is that it focuses the policy implementation on only a few entities. Yes, we all have to change our behaviors, but that's 8 billion of us having to change our lives. And we must continue to do that. But additionally, we should have another way of moving the needle towards carbon neutrality, and that's by going at where it is the simplest, with the fewest entity to implement. And that is going to be at the source of fossil carbon production. There's only about 100,000 fossil fuel producers around the world. It is orders of magnitude more to try and regulate the 200 million companies that use fossil fuel products, and it is even harder to try and regulate 8 billion people. We should do all of this, but in addition, we should make sure that the producers are responsible also for their products. What else can I tell you? I can tell you about the challenges. And one clear challenge is that it requires standing up and telling the fossil fuel industry they need to get in on this. This is not a punishment. This is just like in any other industry, taking responsibility for their products. In fact, this might be a good option if the alternative is that we shut them down. And as a company, they have the drive to continue, and having an option that lets them continue is probably a good idea. as we continue to transition to a fully renewable energy system. The transition is going to be long, and in the meantime, we are producing a lot of emissions. And this is a policy option that lets us take care of those emissions during the transition. Another challenge might be the problem of trade. Because if you have, let's say, one fossil fuel entity in one region that is implementing this carbon storage obligation, and they are trading with other partners who are not, then you are in a situation where there might be some trade imbalance. Now, the EU is implementing a carbon border adjustment mechanism, so it can be done. This is incentivizing the Americans to also come up with their own border mechanism. So through trade, it might be possible actually to spread this type of policy around the world. And that's all I have. But I don't know how much time I have, so I would love to have a discussion, because I think this is the core of what we are missing as a new carbon economy, and we should really seriously consider whether this might be an option. Yeah.
Kyle Dada with Teneo. Thank you for that. I think if you're open to collegial discussion,
Yeah.
I think we're mixing two concepts, one of which is very powerful and very laudable. The other has a lot of unintended consequences. So the first one, producer obligation, is a very laudable concept. The second one, choosing a technology class a priori, which is the sequestration portion, is extremely dangerous. This is akin in waste management to saying, right, you have to incinerate. You're taking the most expensive and the most capital-intensive technology class and requiring it as the solution. That's a problem for a number of reasons, and hear me out, because I think it's important to think through this. It's a problem because it sucks out the more efficient approaches. In waste, it was reduce, reuse, recycle. That was much cheaper than capital-intensive. In here, it's actually going to be efficiency and a number of different technologies that are far cheaper. And all of us in this room know that, and I've stated it already, that CDR is probably the most expensive on the supply curve of mitigation. Secondly, it's incredibly regressive. And you're not seeing that as a challenge or recognizing the implication of that. I would just direct you to Washington State's law, how they wrote the law on the carbon markets. They really thought through the equity issues. And when you do something like this, choose the most expensive and a take-or-pay obligation around it, you are creating a massive regressive tax, and you're not allowing any mechanism to address that. So the CSO is very powerful and very good. I don't want to lose that strong concept. Choosing a technology class, especially the one at the very end of the chain, is a real problem. And only to get that doubling of demand that you need to scale, there are other ways to do that.
I'm really glad you bring this up. I think this is a critical point of discussion. So let me try and unpack this a little bit. The first one is, I think perhaps there is a terminology discussion to be had, because by storage or sequestration, I don't necessarily mean geological storage or minerals. So if you're thinking this is what I was talking about, no, I mean very broadly, any type of CDR that is shown to be safe, verified, and permanent can fit into this system. Okay, then I specifically did that on purpose. Because, let me explain. This is a new economic system. The economic system that it does, and I will address the equity issue here, is that it makes fossil fuels more expensive by including the cost of cleaning up. By doing so, It's making every single product that we use carbon neutral, but also more expensive. So by indirect consequence, it forces consumers to choose the cheaper option. Right now, we are paying a green premium to do the right thing. In this system, the wrong thing is more expensive, and you choose the right thing because it's cheaper, or should be cheaper, if the technology competition actually works out. Now, yes, and let me try to explain why the alternative is a problem. The current system that we have is taxing everybody, whether or not we are making an effort at decarbonizing ourselves. The only way to stop climate change is to have zero emissions. If we have a tax, the tax has to become so high that it stops you from consuming. Now, I think that is a much more regressive situation than having a system that continues to let you purchase your fossil fuels in a carbon neutral way. Now, it is very true that if you are in the lower income level of society, you will struggle, but you will also struggle under a carbon tax system. And it is even worse because you will have no alternative. Here, the alternative is built in. You are carbon neutral. You do not need to change if you do not have the ways of doing it. Now, you could have, like in the UK, assistance for vulnerable populations. But that requires that we have a compassionate government. And that's what we should be asking for, not putting a tax that is essentially prolonging fossil fuel use. And eventually, when it gets to crunch time, we have no way of switching.
If I could come in on that, and this is a very interesting discussion. I really liked the model you put up, but your points are absolutely valid. And a couple of years ago, we launched the Commonwealth Carbon Tax Model Law to help countries think through these things about how you develop some pricing on carbon at a national scale. And I think that a couple of other challenges with the approach is, one is the 1 ton of carbon in, 1 ton of carbon out approach. Nothing is 100% efficient. And one of the problems with CCS is that you cannot sequester all the carbon that you cannot capture all the carbon and you can't sequester it all, so there is leakage. And so just assuming that the cleanup is going to take care of the waste won't do it. So with that efficiency, I think there's an argument for a carbon tax which creates the price signal for industry that if you want to avoid paying this amount of tax, you have to clean up. And then that leads to innovation in the system that you can say, well, the most cost-effective way of us cleaning up, getting rid of this, is by doing whatever is the most efficient technology or approach or mitigation available to us. So it is technology agnostic. It's in some jurisdictions where there's good innovation that will work. In others, it might be that you need the tax to get the capital flows into the government to create a system that will allow for sequestration or whatever. So it provides those alternatives. If it's targeted just on the main large producers of emissions, it's not going to be regressive on the population as a whole. Yes, the price signal will be passed on, but you get that in whatever system you've got. The thing is, though, if government's got revenues coming from the carbon tax, it can pass those on to the low-income households to mitigate that effect. So it becomes progressive. And then the other element is with a carbon border adjustment mechanism is if you are paying tax at the border on exports, but if you pay it at home, you don't have to pay it at the border. And so essentially for a lot of developing economies, there's a way of recouping those revenues back at home rather than paying them to the EU or to the US. And so that way you start to put more money back into national development rather than exporting it overseas. So there are a number of advantages, I think. It's not a perfect solution, but I think a carbon tax can have a number of advantages in creating that environment you're talking about, but being a bit more progressive and technology agnostic. So, but I'd love to hear a response.
Well, it depends what your goal is, right? Here we're talking about cleaning up carbon. We're not talking about social programs, sustainable development. This is simply a cleaning up system. Yeah. No, a carbon tax does not do that.
Well, it puts the price signal into the market to create an incentive to clean up the system.
I think that only happens if the social cost of carbon becomes so high that you stop consuming.
No, because it's not about the social cost of consumption. It's about if the consumer, if the producer is paying the tax, the producer wants to reduce the tax. So if the producer is paying the tax, the producer wants to reduce that tax. And if it's priced well, it will be at a level where it is more cost effective for the producer to stop polluting than it is to pay the tax. If you've already put in place your mitigation measures, you don't pay the tax.
But that's implicit already in the system.
Yeah, exactly. But this way, you've got a price established that you're going to pay, and so it drives the producer to clean up their activity. Rather than passing it on as a social cost of carbon. And if it comes into their pricing, then there's mechanisms for the government to have some income, particularly for smaller producers who don't necessarily have the ability to help them clean that up by creating a pool of capital that can then go back into reinvestment. So the big producers end up creating the capital flows, and then those capital flows can be redeployed to clean up for those that don't have the capacity to clean up. So,
this is clearly a very interesting and involved conversation, which you're going to continue in the coffee break. We have literally 60 seconds left. Is it Gary or is it Klaus? Yeah. Literally 60 seconds.
Well, first let me say I like this approach a lot. In large measure because it allows governments to put their policies where their mouths are. And when I say that, I start with an important distinction that I think we all need to make, and that is in the case of the oil and gas industry, 70 to 80% of it, depending on exactly how you count it, is government. These are government entities controlled by governments. And since I only have 60 seconds, I'll only make one other observation. These companies don't pay taxes. They pass them on to the customer, which makes it regressive again, Kyle. It's important when we talk, for example, yesterday about trillions of dollars of subsidies to the industry. This is not subsidies to the industry. This is subsidies to consumption, to avoid the regressive problem that you're talking about, Kyle. And I'll just stop there with my 60 seconds.